The Badlands, washed south of Cinder Bluff, stretched white and merciless under an August sun that could leach the moisture from a man's bones in hours. Heat shimmered off the cracked earth in waves that made the distant buttes dance like spirits, though Chattanooga Redhawk, called Crowfoot by his Lakota kin, no longer believed in spirits. At 34 winters scarred from the wars of the 1860s, when the blue coats swept through the hunting grounds, he believed in what a man could see, touch, and survive. Right now, survival seemed unlikely. Autumn 1874. The abandoned mine shaft had swallowed him 12 feet down when the rotted timbers gave way beneath his moccasins. His left knee had twisted with an audible crack against the rock wall during the fall, and the pain that followed was a white-hot lance that made his vision blur. He'd managed to splint the leg with his leather belt and a broken shovel handle found in the shaft's debris, cinching the makeshift brace tight enough to make him bite through his lip. Blood mixed with the alkaline dust on his chin. His canteen lay empty beside him, the last drops drunk at dawn. That had been how long the sun's angle suggested mid-afternoon now, perhaps the third hour since the fall. Thirst clawed at his throat. Above at the rim of the shaft, 3 coyotes paced in patient circles, their shadows crossing the small circle of brutal blue sky that was his only window to the living world. Chattanooga had been tracking the horse thieves for 2 days across the Badlands. The gang had raided Fort Weber's corrals in the dark of the moon, making off with a dozen army mounts, bays and roans, with the branded U.S. still fresh on their flanks. The tracks led south through Lakota territory, and the tribal council had sent him to scout the route and report back. The Army's problems were not his people's concern. But horses stolen across their land could bring blue coat patrols, and patrols brought trouble. Better to know the thieves' direction. He'd been closing the distance when the ground betrayed him. Old prospector pits dotted these flats like pox scars, most filled in or marked, but this one had been hidden beneath a crust of hardpan and creosote brush. Now he lay in its belly knee, shattered, waiting for the coyotes to grow bold, or the sun to finish what the fall had started. Then a shadow fell across the opening. Chattanooga's hand moved instinctively to his knife, but the silhouette was wrong, too small, too hesitant. A woman's voice called down in accented English rough, from disuse, but clear. "You breathe." "Yes." His own voice rasped like sand on leather. A pause, then, "I lower rope. You tie." "Leg broken, cannot climb." Another pause longer. He heard her boots scrape rock, heard her muttering in a language he didn't recognize, German, though he had no way of knowing. Then her face appeared over the rim, framed by the sky, and a tangle of dark blonde hair escaping from a braid. Late 20s, perhaps 30, with a jaw set hard and eyes that assessed him with the practicality of someone used to trouble. "I come down," she said. "Dangerous." "Everything is." She disappeared from view. Minutes later, a rawhide rope snaked down its end and tied to something above. The woman descended hand over hand, with the practiced ease of someone who'd done harder things. Her calico dress faded blue and torn at the hem from thorny brush, caught on the shaft's rough walls. She landed beside him in a crouch, breathing hard, and studied his splinted leg with a critical eye. "Hazel Kruger," she said, not offering her hand. "You are Lakota." "Chattanooga. My people call me Crowfoot." She nodded once, then unslung a water skin from her shoulder. His heart leapt, but when she unstoppered it and tipped it toward his lips, only a few drops came. Empty. The despair must have shown on his face, because her expression shifted something between pity and resignation crossing her features. "No water," she said. "I walked 4 miles. My still. I have nothing but—" She stopped, color rising in her cheeks, despite the heat. Her hand moved to her chest, then dropped. "You die of thirst soon. Hours, maybe." I can give you. Understanding struck him like a fist. He saw the faint damp spots on the calico over her breasts, the way she held herself. A nursing mother, but no child visible. Stillborn, she said flatly, answering his unasked question. 3 weeks passed. The nourishment, it does not stop yet. And I have this. She pulled a small tin flask from her belt. Whiskey. From my still. Diluted. Not much food in it, but some. Keeps a man from shock a little longer. In that moment, Chetan Luda understood the frontier in a way he hadn't before. Survival stripped away shame. Dignity was a luxury of the comfortable. Do it, he said. Hazel knelt beside him, unlaced the front of her dress with trembling fingers, and guided his head to her breast. The nourishment was warm and thin, but wet, and his body seized on it with desperate gratitude. She let him drink while she tilted the flask to his lips, between pulls the harsh whiskey cutting the sweetness, the alcohol a faint promise of calories his body craved. It was not enough to sustain him. Long nourishment provided fluid, the whiskey barely a trickle of sustenance. But it bought him time. It kept the shock at bay. It let his heart keep beating. When he finished, she relaced her dress and wiped her eyes quickly with the back of her hand. Neither spoke. She examined the rope, then the shaft walls, calculating. I cannot carry you, she said. But I can pull. We use the rope, and she gestured to a jutting rock embedded in the shaft wall. That. You push with your good leg. I pull from above, slow. Why help me? Her gaze was steady. Because I am here. Because you are here. Out here, that is reason enough. It took an hour. She climbed back up, secured the rope around his chest and under his arms, then hauled from above, while he braced his good leg against the wall and pushed. Inch by agonizing inch, with her grunting effort and his muffled groans, they dragged him toward the light. Halfway up, his splint slipped, and the pain whited out his vision. But her voice cut through, push, damn you, and he did. When his hands finally gripped the rim and she pulled him over the edge onto the baking flats, they both lay gasping in the dust. The coyotes had retreated to a wary distance. A single sagebrush tree offered a scrap of shade 30 yards off. Hazel helped him crawl to it, his knee screaming, and he collapsed in its meager shadow. She sat beside him, breathing hard, and stared out at the blinding white expanse. Dust devils twisted in the distance. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had just crossed a threshold together without fully understanding what lay on the other side. You rest now, Hazel said finally. Then you walk. Then you leave. But her hand, when she checked his pulse at the wrist, lingered a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, a fragile thread spun from necessity and the simple fact of survival. The journey to Hazel's Canyon was a 3-mile crawl through hell. She'd rigged a travois from sagebrush poles and strips of rawhide, dragging it behind her mule, a stubborn gray beast named Gus, who eyed Chetan Luda with suspicion, but obeyed Hazel's quiet commands. Chetan Luda lay on the travois, every jolt and rut sending fresh agony through his shattered knee, his teeth clenched so hard his jaw ached. We stop soon, Hazel said over her shoulder, her voice strained with effort. Canyon just over that rise. Chetan Luda tried to respond, but managed only a grunt. Fever was beginning to set in heat, radiating from the swollen joint. Through his pain-hazed vision, he watched Hazel's back as she walked the set of her shoulders at the methodical pace she maintained despite exhaustion. She moved like someone who'd learned survival the hard way. Every motion, economical, every decision weighted against scarcity. You should leave me, he managed. Too slow, too dangerous. Already had this conversation, Hazel said without turning. You lost. Lakota could come. Soldiers, anyone. Let them come. I have lived alone for 9 months. I can shoot straight enough. Why risk it? This time she did stop turning to look down at him. Sweat darkened her dress at the collar and underarms. Her face was smudged with alkali dust, but her eyes were clear and hard as flint. "Because I am tired," she said simply. "Tired of burying people. Tired of doing everything alone. Tired of this place taking and never giving back. So maybe I save one person. Maybe that is enough to balance the ledger." She turned back and resumed walking before he could respond. But Chetan Luta understood. In the wars, he'd felt the same, the exhaustion that came not from fighting, but from losing. The weight of names and faces that no longer answered when called. When they finally reached the canyon, the sun hung low and orange in the west. The hidden fold in the Badlands appeared suddenly a narrow slash in the earth invisible until you were nearly upon it. Cottonwoods clustered near a seep spring, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. The canyon walls provided shade and shelter, and tucked into the north face was Hazel's dugout, a single room carved into the rock reinforced with salvaged timber. She unhitched Gus and half-carried, half-dragged Chetan Luta into the dugout. The interior was spare but clean, a dirt floor swept smooth, a rope bed with a thin mattress, a sheet metal stove, shelves lined with canned goods and sacks of cornmeal. A Henry rifle hung above the door, its barrel gleaming with fresh oil. Hazel laid him on a pallet of folded blankets in the coolest corner, then fetched water from the spring in a tin bucket. She used a rag to clean the worst of the dirt from his wounds, her touches surprisingly gentle for someone who moved with such brusque efficiency. "This will hurt," she said, producing a bottle of her raw whiskey. She poured it directly onto the swollen knee. Chetan Luta's vision went white. He bit down on a strip of leather she'd shoved between his teeth, every muscle in his body going rigid. When the worst passed, he found her watching him with something like approval. "You are strong," she said. "That is good. You will need to be." She wrapped the knee in clean cloth, and then brought him water and a bowl of thin stew rabbit and wild onions, barely seasoned but hot. He ate slowly, his hands shaking, while she tended to other tasks, checking the still hidden in the canyon's far corner, securing Gus in a lean-to, banking the stove for the night. "You have done this before," Chetan Luta said, when she finally sat on a crate across from him, her own bowl in hand. "Taking care of injured men. My husband, Johan, he was careless, always hurting himself. Broken fingers, gashes, burns from the still, I learned." She paused. "And before him, my father. He worked in a brewery in the old country. Heavy work, dangerous." "Where is your husband now?" Her expression closed. "Dead. 9 months ago. They said Lakota raiders shot him on the freight road." "We do not raid the freight road. There is a truce." "I know." She met his eyes. "I knew when they told me it was a lie. But what could I do? A widow alone, no family, no money, except what I make from the still. I buried him and kept quiet." "You do not believe it was my people?" "No." "Then who? That is what I would like to know." She set down her bowl and pulled a folded paper from inside her dress. "I found this in Johan's saddlebag 3 months after he died. It is a torn piece of an army payroll manifest, dated last October, and there is a map of this canyon on the back." She unfolded the paper and showed him. The manifest listed gold ingots weights and serial numbers. The map showed the canyon with a crude X marked near the still's location. Chetan Luta studied it, his mind working despite the fever. "Your husband was involved in something illegal, with the army gold?" "Yes, I think so. And I think he hid something here before he died. And I think whoever killed him is looking for it." "Have you searched?" Not yet. I was afraid. If I find it, if it is real. She trailed off and then looked at him directly. Will you help me when you are healed? Why would you trust me? Because you have no reason to betray me. You are Lakota. The army is not your friend. And because... She hesitated. Because I have been alone too long. And I think you understand what that feels like. Chitan Luda held her gaze. In her eyes, he saw the same exhaustion he'd felt, the same desperate need for something beyond mere survival. Not hope exactly. Hope was too fragile for the frontier. But perhaps purpose. A reason to keep moving forward. I will help, he said. She nodded once, satisfied. Then she rose and checked the doors bolted, the rifle's loads, the window that faced the canyon mouth. Satisfied that they were as secure as they could be, she lay down on her own pallet across the room. Sleep, she said. We will need it. But neither slept easily that night. Chitan Luda drifted in and out of fevered dreams, the shaft, the coyotes, the taste of nourishment and whiskey, while Hazel lay awake, listening to the sounds of the canyon. She'd grown accustomed to solitude these past months, to the peculiar silence of a place where no other human voice answered. Now there was someone else breathing in the darkness, someone who depended on her. And the weight of that responsibility was both burden and strange comfort. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant. A coyote howled somewhere on the flats. And in the dugout, two people who should have remained strangers began the slow, uncertain process of learning to trust. 3 days passed in a haze of heat and healing. Hazel tended Chitan Luda's knee twice daily, changing bandages and checking for infection. The joint remained swollen and angry, but the fever subsided, and by the 4th morning he could sit upright without nausea. She brought him broth and hardtack, and he ate while watching her move about the canyon, checking snares, tending the still hauling water from the spring. On the 5th day, he insisted on trying to stand. Using a pole crutch she'd fashioned from a cottonwood branch, he managed 3 steps before the pain buckled his leg. Hazel caught him, her shoulder under his arm, her hand braced at his ribs. Too soon, she said. I must move. Cannot lie still forever. You are healing. Do not ruin it with pride. But she helped him hobble outside to sit in the shade, and he was grateful. The canyon was beautiful in its harsh way. The red rock walls, the rustling cottonwoods, the clear water pooling in the spring. A hidden place, a refuge. He understood why Hazel had chosen it. Tell me about the still, he said as she worked nearby, chopping sagebrush for the furnace. What about it? How long have you run it? Since Johann died. Before that he ran it, and I helped. It was his idea, said we could make money selling whiskey to the drovers and freight outfits, legal or not. She paused in her chopping. He was always looking for the easy way, the quick money. I think that is why he got involved with whatever got him killed. The gold. Yes, the gold. She set down the axe and wiped her forehead. I should search for it. If it is here, I need to know. But I am afraid of finding it, of what comes after. Gold brings trouble, always. Then we search together, when I can walk. She looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. You would do that, help me search for something that could get us both killed. You saved my life. That creates obligation. I do not want obligation. I want... She stopped, shook her head. I do not know what I want anymore. Chitan Luda understood. Want was a luxury like dignity. Out here, you learned to settle for survival. That evening, as the sun painted the canyon walls, Amber and Rose, Hazel went down into the root cellar to retrieve supplies. The cellar was a natural depression she'd expanded by hand, digging into the clay with a spade. It held her stores sacks of cornmeal jars of preserves, coils of rope, and buried in the farthest corner, wrapped in canvas and hidden beneath burlap something else. She'd found the cache while digging 3 months ago, guided by the cryptic note in Johann's hand. Check the back corner, south wall 2 feet down. At the time, she'd reburied it, immediately too frightened to examine it closely. But now, with Chetan Luta heeling above, and the weight of unknowing pressing down, she made herself look. 12 gold ingots each, stamped with U.S. Treasury and the Eagle seal. Army bridle hardware bits, stirrup leathers, buckles still bearing the distinctive Fort Weber markings. And a small oilskin packet containing letters and manifests. Hazel's hands shook as she lifted the packet. This was the proof she'd been too afraid to seek. Proof that Johann had been part of something terrible. Proof that his death was no accident. She was about to open the packet when she heard it hoofbeats. Multiple horses coming from the south at an easy walk. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She shoved the packet into her dress, covered the cache, and climbed out of the cellar, securing the trap door. "Riders," she hissed to Chetan Luta, who was already reaching for the Henry rifle. "How many? 3, maybe 4. Hide, now." She pulled him toward the narrow crevice at the back of the dugout, partially hidden by stacked barrels. It was barely wide enough for 1 person, let alone 2. She squeezed in first, then he dragged himself in behind her, biting down on his pain. She pulled the barrels back into place as best she could from inside. The space was suffocating. Hazel's chest pressed against the cold rock, Chetan Luta's body against her back. She could feel his heartbeat through his shirt, could smell the sage smoke in his hair, the sweat and leather, and something else, the particular scent of him, earthy and alive. His hand found her waist in the darkness, steadying them both in the cramped space. The hoofbeats stopped outside. Boots hit the ground, voices low and rough. "Smells like mash. Pike was right, she's running a still. Where's the woman? Probably out checking snares or something. Let's look around." Footsteps crossed the canyon floor, circling the dugout. Through the gap between barrels, Hazel could see a slice of the room, the stove, the corner of her pallet, the rifle rack now empty. Her breath came shallow and fast. Behind her, Chetan Luta's hand tightened on her waist, a silent message steady. One of the men kicked the dugout's entrance frame. "Anybody home?" Silence. Then another voice, quieter. "Fire's cold. Nobody here now. Check inside. Make sure." Heavy boots entered the dugout. Hazel's heart hammered so loud she was certain the man could hear it. The footsteps moved closer past the stove, past the pallet, toward the barrels. In the crevice, Chetan Luta's free hand moved to his knife, drawing it silently. Hazel felt the shift in his body, the coiling readiness of a predator preparing to strike. His breath was warm against the back of her neck, steady despite the danger. The man stopped directly in front of their hiding place. Through the gap, Hazel saw his boots worn leather, crusted with alkali. He stood so close, she could have reached through the barrels and touched him. She held her breath, every muscle locked. "Anything?" a voice called from outside. "Nah, just a woman's place. Dishes, blankets, nothing special." The man hawked and spat the sound obscene in the small space. "She's probably out screwing some drover for supplies." Laughter from outside. The man turned and walked out. But instead of leaving, the voices continued, now discussing the still. "Pike said to check every canyon south of the bluff. He wants his property back, and he figures the widow woman might have found it." Hazel's blood turned to ice. Chetan Luta's hand on her waist tightened, his thumb pressing against her ribs, a warning or reassurance she couldn't tell. Another voice. "What if she don't know nothing?" A pause, then cold and flat. Then she won't need that still no more, will she? Rough laughter. When we comin' back? Dawn tomorrow. Pike wants to ask her personal. If she knows where the gold is, he'll get it out of her. If she don't, the voice trailed off meaningfully. And if she ain't here, then we burn the place and move on. One less moonshiner for the law to worry about. Boots retreating, saddles creaking, hoofbeats fading north up the canyon and out onto the flats. They waited in the crevice for another 10 minutes, neither moving until the silence settled back into the natural sounds of the canyon wind. But the trickle of the spring, a raven's croak. Hazel realized she was trembling fine shakes running through her whole body. Chetan Luda's hand moved from her waist to cover her trembling fingers, his palm warm and rough and steadying. They are gone, he whispered finally. She nodded, but couldn't seem to move. The fear had frozen her locked every muscle. Chetan Luda shifted in the tight space, turning slightly so he could see her face in the dimness. Hazel, look at me. She turned her head. Their faces were inches apart in the darkness, so close she could see the fine scars on his cheekbone, the concern in his eyes. You are safe. We are safe. For now. They are coming back at dawn. Her voice was thin, breathless. Pike wants to. They will torture me. Kill us both. They will not get the chance. We leave tonight. Where they know about the canyon now, they will track us wherever we go. Then we go where they cannot follow. Cinder Bluff, the town. We find allies, we gather evidence about the gold, and we make sure Pike hangs for what he's done. How I am just a moonshiner. You are Lakota. Who will believe us? We make them believe. His hand cupped her jaw gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. You saved my life. You pulled me from that shaft when leaving me would have been safer. You fed me with your own body when you had nothing else to give. That kind of courage does not just disappear, it is still in you. I see it. Hazel felt something crack open in her chest, all the loneliness and fear and desperate hope of the past months spilling out in a rush. I am afraid. So am I. But we do this together or we die together. Your choice. The word together hung between them, solid as a promise. Hazel took a shaking breath and nodded. Together. His thumb traced her cheekbone, once a gesture so tender it made her throat tighten. Then he released her and began the awkward process of maneuvering out of the crevice. Hazel followed her legs, unsteady, and immediately began gathering supplies, ammunition, dried meat, a change of clothes, the oilskin packet she'd hidden in her dress. The gold, Chetan Luda said. We leave it. For now. If Pike finds it here, let him. But we take the papers. They are the real evidence. They worked quickly and silently, packing saddlebags and checking weapons. Hazel loaded the Henry rifle, then handed Chetan Luda a Spencer carbine she'd kept hidden. He checked its action with the ease of someone who'd handled many weapons. As darkness fell, they left the canyon. Hazel took one last look at the dugout, the life she'd built in the months since Johan's death. Then she turned her back on it and led Gus up the narrow trail that would take them north toward Cinder Bluff, toward whatever waited in that hard-scrabble town of false fronts and desperate men. Behind them, the canyon filled with shadows. Ahead, the Badlands stretched vast and unforgiving under a rising moon. And somewhere out there, Elias Pike and his men waited patient as wolves. The 8 miles to Cinder Bluff took them all night. They moved slowly because of Chetan Luda's knee following dry washes and rocky ground that wouldn't hold tracks. Hazel let her eyes adjusted to the darkness, while Chetan Luda walked behind, leaning on his makeshift crutch and the carbine he used as a staff. Neither spoke much. Words were a luxury when every breath needed to be measured, every sound analyzed for threat. They reached the outskirts of town as dawn broke pale and cold over the prairie. Cinder Bluff squatted on a low rise, a collection of weathered buildings and canvas tents strung along the freight road. At this hour, the street was mostly empty, a few early risers tending to horses, smoke rising from stovepipes, the smell of coffee and bacon drifting from the boarding house. Dr. Morrow's place, Hazel said quietly. At the end of the street. We go around back. They circled wide through the scattered homesteads, approaching the yellow house from the direction of the kitchen garden. A woman in her 40s was drawing water from a well, her dark hair shot through with gray and pinned in a severe bun. She looked up as they approached, her sharp eyes taking in Chetan Luta's splinted leg and Hazel's exhausted face in a single glance. Hazel Kruger, heard you'd disappeared. Not disappeared. Avoiding company? The bad kind, I expect. Dr. Eliza Morrow's gaze moved to Chetan Luta. And you've brought a patient. He needs his knee properly set. And we need somewhere to rest. Somewhere Deputy Greeley won't think to look. Eliza's expression sharpened at Greeley's name. Come inside, quickly. The examination room was small but meticulously organized. Eliza helped Chetan Luta onto the padded table and began unwrapping Hazel's bandages with practiced efficiency. When she exposed the swollen joint, she tisked. You did decent field work, Hazel. Probably saved the joint. But this needs resetting and proper bracing. She looked at Chetan Luta. This will hurt considerably. I know. Eliza produced a brown bottle. Laudanum, 2 swallows. You'll want it. For the next 40 minutes, Hazel stood by the window and tried not to flinch at the sounds bone grinding on bone, Chetan Luta's harsh breathing, the wet snap, as Eliza manipulated the kneecap back into proper alignment. When it was finished, Chetan Luta lay gray-faced and sweating while Eliza applied a poultice of arnica and comfrey, then splinted the leg with wooden slats and tight linen wraps. Keep weight off this for 2 weeks minimum. After that gentle movement. No riding hard, no running for 6 weeks. We may not have 6 weeks, Hazel said quietly. Eliza looked between them. Pike. How did you know? Because Pike's men have been sniffing around town for the past week, asking about a woman running a still in the Badlands. Deputy Greeley's been helping them too, providing information looking the other way when they cause trouble. Something's brewing, and from the looks of you two, you're right in the middle of it. Hazel pulled the oilskin packet from her dress and spread the contents on Eliza's desk, the torn Army manifest, Johann's cryptic notes, a partial ledger page listing dates and gold weights with the initials TG. Johann was part of an Army payroll robbery last October. He hid the gold in my canyon. Pike and Deputy Greeley were his partners, and they killed him when he tried to back out. Now they want the gold, and they think I know where it is. Eliza studied the papers, her face grave. This is enough to hang them both. If you can get it to someone who'll act on it. Who? The Army has an investigator assigned to Fort Weber, Captain Lewis. He's been looking into corruption in the supply lines. This would be exactly what he needs. Can we trust him? He's not from around here. No local ties. That makes him cleaner than most. Eliza looked at Chetan Luta, who'd propped himself on his elbows despite the laudanum. You need allies. The school teacher Ruth Carver helps people quietly. Lakota families' widows, anyone the town turns its back on. And there's Jonas Bell, a homesteader west of here. Solid man. If you need a place to hide while you figure this out, he might help. What about Greeley? Hazel asked. If he finds out we're in town, he won't hear it from me. But Cinder Bluff's a small place. You can't hide here for long. As if summoned by his name, heavy boots sounded on the front porch. A moment later, a knock. Eliza's face went pale. "Back room, now." Hazel and Chitan Luda moved as quickly as Chitan Luda's knee allowed, ducking through a curtained doorway into Eliza's private quarters. Through the thin fabric, they could hear the front door open. "Morning, Dr. Morrow." The voice was smooth, almost pleasant. "Deputy Greeley, just making rounds, checking on folks." "Everything's fine here, Deputy." "Glad to hear it. Say you happened to see Hazel Kruger recently. Word is her canyon place burned down. Some folks are worried about her." "Haven't seen her." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, just being thorough. Woman alone out in the Badlands, dangerous, especially with Pike's gang ranging through. If she shows up, you'll let me know, won't you?" "Of course." A pause. Hazel could picture Greeley's eyes scanning the room looking for signs. Her heart hammered. "You got a patient back there." "Just supplies. Medical equipment." "Mind if I take a look?" "Actually, I do mind. This is a medical office, Deputy, not a saloon. Unless you have a warrant, I'll ask you to respect my patient's privacy." Another pause longer. Then Greeley's voice colder now. "You're walking a thin line, Doctor. Helping the wrong people could make your life difficult." "I'll keep that in mind." Boots retreating, the door closing. Eliza waited a full minute before pulling back the curtain. "He knows something," she said. "Maybe not everything, but enough to be suspicious. You can't stay here." "Where do we go?" "Jonas Bell's homestead, 10 miles west. I'll draw you a map and give you a letter of introduction. If you leave now, you can reach it by mid-afternoon. Stay off the main road." She scribbled directions and a brief note, then handed Hazel a bundle bread cheese bandages, a small bottle of laudanum. "For the road." And Hazel. "Yes. Whatever you and Johann were mixed up in, whatever Pike wants, be careful. Men like Greeley and Pike don't leave witnesses. They'll kill you both without blinking." "I know." They left through the back door, circling through the kitchen gardens and outbuildings until they reached the edge of town. The freight road stretched west, rutted and dusty, and they followed it for a mile before cutting south into the grassland where the cover was better. The ride to Jonas Bell's place was slow and tense. Chitan Luda sat astride Gus with visible effort, his face drawn with pain despite the laudanum. Hazel walked alongside, leading the mule and scanning the horizon constantly for dust plumes that might signal riders. The prairie rolled around them in the waves of buffalo grass and sage empty under the climbing sun. "Tell me about Jonas Bell," Chitan Luda said to break the silence. "I do not know him well. He came to the canyon once to buy whiskey, said it was for medicinal purposes. He paid fair and did not ask questions. Eliza seems to trust him. And we are trusting Eliza. We do not have much choice." "No, we do not." He shifted in the saddle, grimacing. "If Pike finds us at Bell's place, then we fight, or we run again. That is all we can do. You are getting tired of running." It wasn't a question. Hazel glanced up at him, surprised by his perception. "Yes, I am tired of it. Tired of being afraid, tired of looking over my shoulder. I want—" She stopped, unsure how to finish. "You want to stop moving long enough to breathe." "Yes, I understand. After the wars, I ran for 3 years, tracking the men who burned my village, always moving, never resting. It empties you out, makes you forget what it feels like to just be. What made you stop?" "I fell in a mine shaft." He smiled slightly, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "And a stubborn German widow pulled me out." Despite everything, Hazel felt her lips curve. "Stubborn. That is one word for it. It is a compliment. Stubborn people survive. Or they get killed doing something foolish. Sometimes both. They walked on in companionable silence, and Hazel found herself grateful for his presence, not just for the protection, but for the simple fact of not being alone. For 9 months, she'd carried the weight of survival entirely by herself. Now, with Chitan Luda beside her, the burden felt somehow more bearable, shared. Jonas Bell's homestead appeared in mid-afternoon, a sod dugout and rough corral nestled in a fold of land near a creek. Bell himself was mending fence, a weathered man in his 50s, with gnarled hands and a face like tanned leather. He looked up as they approached, his expression wary, until he read Eliza's note. "Dr. Morrow vouches for you. That's enough for me." He studied Chitan Luda's splinted leg. "You'll want to stay off that. Barn's yours if you need a place. I'll bring food after dark. Less people see you, better for everyone." "We can pay," Hazel offered. "Keep your money. Just fix that broken wagon axle in the barn if you got time." Back's not what it was. They settled into the barn's loft, a space that smelled of hay and old leather. It was cramped, but defensible, good sight lines through the wall cracks, one entrance they could watch. Chitan Luda lowered himself onto a pile of blankets with a grunt, his face gray with exhaustion and pain. Hazel examined his knee, checking for fresh bleeding. The splint was holding, but the joint was hot to the touch. "You need rest. Real rest." "I know, but we do not have time for rest. We make time. Pike cannot find us here unless someone talks, and Jonas does not seem the talking type." "What about Greeley, if he suspects Eliza helped us?" "Then we deal with that when it happens. Right now, you need to heal." She rewrapped the bandage, her movements gentle. When she finished, she found him watching her with an odd expression. "What? You are good at this. Taking care of people." "I have had practice." "Still, you did not have to pull me from that shaft. You did not have to bring me to your home, feed me, protect me. You chose to do those things. What else would I do, leave you to die?" "Many would have." Hazel looked away, uncomfortable with the gratitude in his voice. "Out here we help each other. That is how we survive." "Is that the only reason?" She didn't answer immediately. The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to examine. Finally, she said, "I was alone for a long time. Too long. Maybe I needed someone to help as much as you needed help." Chitan Luda's hand found hers, his grip warm and solid. "Then we are fortunate to have found each other." "Fortunate." She almost laughed. "I fell in a mine shaft, and you got shot at by Pike's gang. That is your idea of fortune. We are alive. That is all the fortune anyone gets on the frontier." He had a point. She squeezed his hand once, then released it, and moved to the loft's edge to keep watch. Below, Jonas worked in the yard, unhurried and methodical. The afternoon light slanted gold through the barn slats, and somewhere a meadowlark sang. For the first time in weeks, Hazel allowed herself to exhale. They were safe. For now. That night, as Chitan Luda slept fitfully beside her in the hay fever spiking from the day's exertion, Hazel kept vigil. She sat with her back against the barn wall, the Henry rifle across her lap, and listened to the sounds of his breathing, sometimes labored, sometimes easing into something deeper. Around midnight, he began to mutter in his sleep words in Lakota she couldn't understand. She moved closer and pressed her palm to his forehead. Burning hot. The fever had spiked dangerously. "Jonas," she called down softly. The homesteader appeared a moment later, carrying a lantern. "Fever. Bad. I need cold water, clean cloths." Jonas brought what she needed, then retreated without questions. Hazel spent the rest of the night sponging Shaitan Luda's face and chest with cold water, changing the cloths as they warmed, trying to bring the fever down. He muttered and thrashed, calling out names Winona Tatanka, others she didn't know. Once he gripped her wrist with surprising strength and spoke in clear English. "I'm sorry. I couldn't save them. The fire. Shh. You are safe. No fire here. They burned, all of them. Women, children. I tried. I know you tried." She stroked his hair back from his sweating forehead, her voice soothing. "But you are here now. You are safe." He quieted at her touch, his grip on her wrist loosening. She stayed close, one hand on his chest, to feel the rise and fall of his breathing, the other holding his hand. As the fever slowly broke near dawn, she found herself studying his face in the gray light and the strong lines and the scars that told stories of violence, survived the vulnerability that showed only in sleep. She thought about the nourishment she'd given him, the desperate intimacy of that moment in the mine shaft. She'd tried to tell herself it was just survival, just necessity. But sitting here now, holding his hand through the fever, she knew it had been more than that. It had been a choice, a beginning. When his eyes finally opened clear and focused, he found her watching him. "You stayed. Where else would I go? You could have left. Let me burn through the fever alone. That is not how this works. How what works? This, us, whatever we are building here." She looked down at their joined hands. "You said we do this together. I am holding you to that." A slow smile crossed his face. "Good." By the third day, at Jonas Bell's homestead, Chet and Luda could walk short distances without the crutch, and the fever hadn't returned. Hazel had repaired the broken wagon axle, and Jonas, true to his word, asked no questions about their presence or plans. But on the evening of the fourth day, as Hazel was drawing water from the well, Jonas approached with a troubled expression. "Riders came through this morning. Pike's men. They were asking about a woman and a Lakota man. Said there's a reward for information." Hazel's stomach dropped. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. Sent them on their way." "But Hazel—" He hesitated. "One of them mentioned they'd be checking every homestead between here and the fort. Said Deputy Greeley's helping them organize a search. You can't stay here much longer." "Where do we go?" "There's an old stagecoach way station about 15 miles south. Been abandoned since the troubles after the '68 tensions on the Bozeman Trail. Stone walls, good cover water from a seep spring. If you could make it there and hole up, you might be able to wait out the search. Or we could be trapped. That's the risk. But staying here, you'll be found for certain. At least the way station gives you defensible ground." Hazel found Shaitan Luda in the barn, checking their weapons and supplies. She told him about Jonas's warning and the way station option. "It could be a trap," Shaitan Luda said immediately. "If Pike learns where we are, he'll surround us. But if we keep running eventually, we'll be too tired to fight. At least at the way station, we choose the ground. And the Army investigator, Captain Lewis. Eliza said she'd try to get word to him. But that could take weeks. We need to survive until then." Shaitan Luda was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "Then, if we go to the way station, we go prepared. We set traps, scout escape routes, cache supplies. We turn it into a fortress. Can we do that in time?" "We have to." They spent the evening making plans, drawing maps in the dirt, discussing fields of fire and fallback positions. Jonas contributed what he could: extra ammunition, dried meat rope for tripwires. As the sun set, he pulled Hazel aside. "There's something else you should know. Deputy Greeley came by yesterday when you were resting. He was asking questions about you specifically. Asked if I'd seen you, if I knew where your canyon was. I played dumb, but he's smart. He might have guessed I was lying. Did he threaten you? Jonas's jaw tightened. He mentioned my daughter. Said it'd be a shame if anything happened to her on her way to the schoolhouse. Said Pike's men can be careless when they're drinking. Cold fury rose in Hazel's chest. He threatened a child. He didn't say it outright, but the meaning was clear. I am sorry. We brought this to your door. You didn't bring anything I wasn't already carrying. I've hated Greeley for years. Corrupt son of a bitch has been bleeding this territory dry. If helping you puts a noose around his neck, I'll call it fair trade. He paused. But Hazel, you should know Greeley's not working alone. There's someone above him. Someone with real power. Pike's just hired muscle. Greeley's the fixer. But there's a third man, someone giving orders. You find him, you cut the head off the snake. Who? I don't know, but Captain Lewis might. Be careful who you trust. They left Jonas's homestead that night, riding under a quarter moon. Jonas sent them off with a bag of provisions and a quiet handshake. You kill Pike, you do it for all of us, he said. We will try. The ride to the way station took most of the night. They moved slowly, using the terrain for cover, stopping frequently to listen. Twice they heard distant hoofbeats and went to ground, pressing themselves flat against the prairie while riders passed in the darkness. The way station appeared at dawn, exactly as Jonas had described, a low stone structure hunched against the base of a sandstone ridge. The walls were thick, built to withstand Apache arrows and rifle fire, with narrow window slits and a single reinforced door. The roof had partially collapsed, but the structure was fundamentally sound. They spent the morning preparing. Chetan Luda, despite his knee-rigged tripwires around the perimeter, using rawhide and tin cans filled with pebbles. Hazel reinforced the windows with scavenged boards and cached ammunition in multiple locations. They scouted escape routes up the ridge and tested the spring. It flowed clear and cold enough water for a siege if it came to that. By midday, they were as ready as they could be. They ate a cold meal and settled in to wait. Hazel took first watch, sitting by the east window with a Henry rifle across her lap. Chetan Luda stretched out on the stone floor to rest his leg, but she could see he wasn't sleeping. His eyes were open, his mind working. What are you thinking? She asked. That we are about to find out if we are as good as we think we are. And if we are not, then we die fighting. There are worse ways to go. I do not want to die. Neither do I, but I am not afraid of it anymore. Not since the shaft. He sat up, grimacing as his knee protested. In that darkness, waiting for the coyotes, I thought that was the end. Then you came. You gave me life again. Whatever happens now, I am grateful for that. Hazel's throat tightened. I wish I had not found that gold. I wish Johan had never gotten involved with Pike and Greeley. I wish. Wishing does not change what is. We can only move forward. Forward into what? Even if we survive Pike, even if we get the evidence to Captain Lewis, what then? I have no home. You have no people nearby. We are both wanted by men with guns and badges. Then we build something new. Somewhere else. Together. That word again, together. It had become a touchstone between them, a promise made and remade with every shared danger. Hazel looked at him across the dim way station, this man who'd fallen into her life by accident and stayed by choice. You really believe that we could have a future? I have to believe it. Otherwise, what are we fighting for? She had no answer to that. So instead, she crossed the room and sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. He didn't move away. Neither did she. When this is over, she said quietly, I want to find a place with water. Good water, not alkali. And trees. And enough land to raise horses. That sounds good. You could bring your sister, her family. We could... She stopped, suddenly uncertain. Or you could go back to your people. I would understand. Hazel. He turned to face her fully. I am not going anywhere without you. Not unless you tell me to leave. I will not tell you to leave. Then we build that future. The one with water and trees and horses. Together. She nodded, not trusting her voice. His hand found hers in the space between them, and they sat like that as the sun climbed higher. Two people on the edge of violence, holding on to each other, like anchors in a storm. The attack came at dusk. Pike's men approached from 3 directions, simultaneously north, south, and west, cutting off the most obvious escape routes. Hazel saw them first shadows resolving into riders in the failing light. 8 men, she called to Chetan Luda. Maybe 9. Pike's whole gang. He wants to end this. They took their positions, Hazel at the east window, Chetan Luda at the south. The riders stopped just outside rifle range and dismounted. Pike himself strode forward, his scarred face lit by the last rays of sun. Hazel Kruger, I know you're in there. You got something of mine and I'm here to collect? Hazel didn't answer. Come on out and we can talk. No need for bloodshed. Just tell me where Johan hid the gold and we'll let you walk away. He is lying, Chetan Luda said quietly. He will kill us the moment we show ourselves. I know. Pike waited, then shrugged. Have it your way. He gestured to his men, and they spread out, taking cover behind rocks and scrub. For a long moment, nothing happened. The prairie held its breath. Then the first shot cracked out a probing round that struck the way station's wall and ricocheted away. Hazel returned fire, aiming for the muzzle flash. The shooter ducked behind a boulder. The siege had begun. For the next hour, Pike's men laid down sporadic fire, testing the way station's defenses, looking for weak points. Hazel and Chetan Luda responded carefully, conserving ammunition, making each shot count. One of Pike's men tried to rush the north window and caught Chetan Luda's bullet in the shoulder. He fell back screaming. As darkness fell, the gunfire slackened. Hazel used the lull to check their ammunition. We have maybe 40 rounds left. If they keep this up all night, they will try something different. Pike is not patient. He was right. An hour after full dark, they heard a new sound and the scrape of boots on stone. Someone was climbing the way station's back wall, trying to reach the collapsed section of roof. Chetan Luda moved to cover that angle, carbine ready. Hazel stayed at the east window, splitting her attention. The climber was good, silent, careful. But when he poked his head through the gap in the roof, Chetan Luda was waiting. He fired once. The man fell backward with a strangled cry. 2 down, Chetan Luda said. 7 to go. But Pike had learned from his mistakes. The next assault came from multiple angles at once, 3 men rushing the south wall, while 2 others laid down covering fire from the north. The way station filled with the roar of gunfire, the acrid smell of burnt powder. Hazel fired until her rifle ran empty, then grabbed her revolver. One of the rushing men reached the window and thrust his arm through firing blind. The bullet whined past her head. She shot him twice at point-blank range, and he dropped. Chetan Luda grappled with another man who'd breached the door. They crashed to the floor, the man's knife flashing in the dim light. Chetan Luda caught his wrist twisted and drove his injured knee into the man's gut. Both men screamed. The knife clattered away. Chetan Luda grabbed a loose stone and brought it down on the man's skull. Outside, Pike roared, "Fall back! Fall back!" Hazel and Chetan Luda crouched in the smoky interior, breathing hard. Blood trickled from a cut on Chetan Luda's forehead, where the man's knife had grazed him. Hazel's hands shook as she reloaded. "We cannot hold another assault like that," she said. "I know." "What do we do?" Before Chetan Luda could answer, a new sound cut through the night hoofbeats, many of them coming fast from the north. Torches appeared on the prairie, a column of riders moving toward the way station. Pike's face went pale. "What the?" a voice called out, amplified and authoritative. "This is Captain Lewis of the U.S. Army. Lay down your weapons." The army had arrived. But as the column drew closer, Hazel felt something twist in her gut. Something wrong. She squinted through the firing slit, trying to make out details in the torchlight. The lead rider wore an officer's uniform and insignia. Behind him rode perhaps 20 soldiers. But behind them, those are not all soldiers. Chetan Luda said, his voice sharp. Some of those men are wearing civilian clothes, hired guns. Hazel's blood ran cold. It is a trap. Outside, Pike seemed equally confused. His remaining men had lowered their weapons, uncertainly caught between relief and suspicion. Captain Lewis dismounted and strode toward Pike, his movements confident. "Mr. Pike, I've been looking for you." "Captain?" Pike's voice was wary. "This is Army business." "Very much so. I understand you've been having difficulty recovering stolen property." "That's one way to put it." Lewis turned toward the way station. "Mrs. Kruger, Mr. Crowfoot, come out, please. This situation has gone on long enough." Hazel and Chetan Luda exchanged glances. Every instinct screamed danger. "Do not go out there," Chetan Luda whispered. "Something is wrong. But if he is really here to help, then why did he bring hired guns? Why did he not arrest Pike immediately? What do? We wait. We watch." Outside, Lewis's patience wore thin. "Mrs. Kruger, I know you have evidence related to the payroll robbery, documents, manifests. I'm here to collect them and ensure your safety. But I need you to come out now." Still, they didn't move. Lewis's expression hardened. "Very well. Sergeant, prepare to breach the structure." "Wait," Hazel called out. "How do we know you are who you say you are?" "I'm a United States Army officer. My credentials can be forged." Johann had forged papers too. A pause. Then Lewis laughed a cold sound. "Clever woman. Yes, you're right to be suspicious. But it doesn't matter. You see, I am who I say I am, Captain Marcus Lewis, investigating officer for the Army Quartermaster. The difference is, I'm not here to arrest Pike. I'm here to finish what we started last October." The truth hit Hazel like a physical blow. Lewis was the third man, the one Jonas had warned about, the one with real power. "You planned the robbery," she said. "I organized it. Pike and Greeley were tools useful but ultimately disposable. Johann was the weak link. He got cold feet, threatened to confess. So we eliminated him. Then the gold went missing, and I've been searching for it ever since. And now you're going to tell me where it is. And then unfortunately, you and your Lakota friend are going to die in a tragic confrontation with Pike's gang. Very sad. Very neat." Pike's face twisted with rage. "You said we'd split the gold. You said Lewis shot him. The bullet took Pike in the chest, and he dropped without a sound. The remaining gang members started to reach for weapons, but Lewis's men, the hired guns, not the soldiers, were faster. Gunfire erupted. In seconds, Pike's entire gang was cut down. Lewis turned back to the way station. Now then, where were we? Ah, yes, the gold. You have 1 minute to tell me, or I'll burn you out. Your choice." Inside the way station, Hazel and Chetan Luta stared at each other, trapped. They were outnumbered 20-2, surrounded with no way out and no help coming. "The gold is in my canyon," Hazel called out, stalling. "Buried in the root cellar. You can have it. Just let us go." "I intend to have it. As for letting you go," Lewis smiled, "I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, too much know too much. You're loose ends, and I don't leave loose ends." He gestured to his men. "Burn them out, and make sure there are no survivors." Two men stepped forward with torches, moving toward the way station. Hazel raised her rifle, but before she could fire, Chetan Luta grabbed her arm. "Wait, look." On the ridge above the way station, shadows were moving. Many shadows. And then, cutting through the night, a sound Hazel had heard only once before, the whistling call of a Lakota war party. Lewis spun, his face going white. "What?" The ridge erupted with riders. 20, 30, maybe more Lakota warriors on swift ponies, bows and rifles at the ready. They swept down the slope like a flood, cutting between Lewis's men and the way station. At their head rode a woman with braids wrapped in otter fur and a Winchester rifle in her hands. She fired twice, and two of Lewis's hired guns fell. Then the night dissolved into chaos, gunfire, war cries, horses screaming. Hazel and Chetan Luta burst from the way station, using the confusion to break through the cordon. Chetan Luta whistled a sharp note, and the woman on the ridge wheeled her horse toward them. "Brother," she called in Lakota, then switched to English. "You take much trouble finding Winona how? Teacher woman," she send message. "Say you need help. So I bring help." She grinned fiercely. "Now we fight." Lewis was shouting orders, trying to rally his men, but half of them were fleeing, unwilling to face a Lakota war party for any amount of gold. The soldiers, caught in the middle and unsure who to obey, held their fire. A young sergeant ran toward the way station, his hands raised. "Mrs. Kruger, I'm Sergeant Carson Fort Weber. We were ordered to accompany Captain Lewis, but we didn't know. We thought this was a legitimate operation." "Lewis planned the robbery," Hazel shouted over the gunfire. "He killed Pike to cover his tracks. He was going to kill us too." Carson's face went from confusion to horror. He turned and began shouting to the other soldiers. Stand down, Lewis is compromised." One by one, the soldiers lowered their weapons, stepping back from the fight. Lewis, seeing his support crumbling, grabbed his horse's reins and tried to mount. But Chetan Luta was faster. He grabbed Lewis's coat and hauled him from the saddle. They went down in a tangle, punching and grappling. Lewis was younger, stronger, but Chetan Luta fought with the desperate fury of a man who'd survived too much to die now. He got his hands around Lewis's throat and squeezed. "Chetan Luta." Hazel ran toward them. "Do not kill him. We need him alive. He has to confess." For a long moment, Chetan Luta didn't move. Then slowly, he loosened his grip. Lewis gasped, clutching his bruised throat. "You are going to tell them everything," Chetan Luta said. "Every detail, every name, or I will let my sister's warriors have you, and they are not as merciful as I am." Lewis, defeated, nodded weakly. By dawn, the way station was secured. Lewis sat bound under guard, his hired guns either fled or captured. Pike and his gang lay dead, covered with canvas. Sergeant Carson had taken command of the army detachment and was taking statements from everyone. Winona approached Hazel and Chetan Luta, who sat together on a rock, exhausted and battered. She looked between them, her expression unreadable. "So, this is the woman who saved my brother. I am Hazel. I am Winona. You have my thanks." She paused. "And you have his heart, I think. I see it in how he looks at you." Hazel felt heat rise in her face. We, Chetan Luta's hand found hers. "Yes," he said simply. "She does." Winona smiled. "Good. You have been alone too long, brother. It is good you found someone stubborn enough to stand with you. She is very stubborn. I am standing right here, Hazel protested. We know, they said in unison, and despite everything, she found herself laughing. Sergeant Carson approached with Jonas Bell, who'd ridden through the night to reach them. Jonas's face was drawn with worry, but he broke into a relieved smile when he saw them alive. You did it, he said. You actually did it. We had help, Hazel said, gesturing to Winona and her warriors. Still, Lewis is finished. Greeley will hang. The gold will be recovered. It is over. But it wasn't quite over. That evening, as the soldiers prepared to transport Lewis and the prisoners back to Fort Weber, Sergeant Carson approached Hazel with a document. Captain Lewis's confession. He's named everyone involved, including several other officers and territorial officials. This is going to shake the whole territory. He paused. There's also the matter of the reward. 10% of the recovered value of the gold. That's about $3,000. It's yours if you want it. Hazel looked at Chetan Luda. What do you think? I think we earned it. With blood. She turned back to Carson. We will take it. But there is a condition. Jonas Bell gets a portion. He risked his family to help us. And Ruth Carver, the school teacher. She should have funding for her school. I'll make sure it's noted in the official report. As the soldiers rode out taking Lewis and the evidence with them, Hazel and Chetan Luda stood at the way station's entrance watching the sun set. Winona and her warriors had departed an hour earlier, riding north with promises to visit in the spring. Jonas had returned to his homestead. The prairie stretched empty and quiet around them. What now? Hazel asked. Now we find that place with water and trees, and we build. Together, always together. She leaned against him, and his arm came around her shoulders. They stood like that as the stars began to appear, two people who'd survived the worst the frontier could offer, and found something worth holding on to. 3 weeks later, they stood on a different ridge, looking down into a valley tucked into the foothills west of Cinder Bluff. A creek ran clear through grassland cottonwoods and willows marking its path. The land was unclaimed, fertile, protected from the worst winds by the surrounding hills. This, Hazel said, this is where we build. They filed a homestead claim at the land office, paid the fees with a small portion of their reward money, and got to work. The first structure they built was a simple cabin, one-room stone fireplace plank floor. Chetan Luda's knee had healed enough for light work, and Hazel proved surprisingly adept, with saw and hammer. They traded labor with neighboring homesteaders, and in return received help with the heavier construction. Jonas Bell brought lumber. Ruth Carver, now teaching in a proper schoolhouse funded by Hazel's donation, brought books and supplies. Eliza Morrow visited to check on Chetan Luda's knee and stayed for dinner, pronouncing them both healthy and happy. By the time the first snow fell in November, they had a home. A corral held 3 horses they'd bought from a rancher down the valley. The root cellar was stocked with preserves and grain. Firewood stood stacked against the cabin's north wall. One evening, as they sat on the narrow porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Chetan Luda spoke. I wrote to Winona, told her where we are. She's welcome to visit whenever she wants. Good. I would like to know her better. She would like that too. He paused. Hazel, there is something I want to say. What? When you pulled me from that shaft, when you gave me your nourishment to keep me alive, you gave me more than just my life. You gave me a reason to keep living, to stop running, to build instead of destroy. He turned to face her fully. I do not have much to offer. I am Lakota in a white man's territory. I have no wealth, no status. But I have this land, this home we built, and I have myself. And I am yours, if you will have me. Hazel felt tears prick her eyes. I am just a widow, with a dead husband's secrets. I have no family, no history that does not hurt. But I have this valley, this future we are building, and I have myself. And I am yours. I have been since the shaft. Maybe before. He kissed her then slow and deep, a promise sealed without words. When they broke apart, both were smiling. We should make it official, Hazel said. Find a preacher, have a ceremony. No preacher will marry a Lakota man and a white woman. Not in this territory. Then we do it ourselves. Here, our way. What way is that? The frontier way. We speak our promises to each other and we hold to them. That is marriage enough. So they did. Under the rising stars with no witnesses but the mountains and the wind, they spoke their vows. Simple words but binding in ways that mattered more than any legal document. I will stand with you, Lakota said. In hard times and good. I will protect you, provide for you, and honor the strength that carried us both to this place. I will stand with you, Hazel echoed, in fear and in peace. I will support you, trust you, and honor the courage that saved us both when we had nothing left. They clasped hands, and Lakota drew a knife, making a small cut on his palm, then hers. They pressed the cuts together, blood mingling. Bound, he said. Bound, she agreed. And it was done. Winter came hard that year, but the cabin was warm. They spent the short days working Lakota, hunting and tanning hides, Hazel mending equipment, and planning the spring garden. They spent the long nights talking, learning each other's stories, filling in the gaps that survival had left empty. Hazel told him about her parents lost to cholera on the crossing, about learning to brew in her grandmother's German village, about Johann's dreams of wealth and the bitter reality of frontier poverty. Lakota told her about the wars, about watching the bluecoats burn his village, about the years spent tracking and hunting men who would never face justice, about his sister's strength and his nephew's laughter, and the family he'd left behind to pursue ghosts. Do you regret it? Hazel asked one night as they lay in their shared bed, the fire crackling low. Leaving them? I did. For a long time. But now... He pulled her closer. Now I have you, and Winona knows where I am. She can come when she wishes, and I will visit when the seasons allow. Family does not have to mean living in the same place. It means keeping the bond strong wherever you are. I like that idea. Good. Because you are family now too. Winona's family. My family. Hazel pressed her face against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. I have not had family in a long time. You do now. Spring came with a rush of snowmelt and greening grass. True to his word, Lakota sister arrived in April with her husband and 2 boys riding into the valley on painted ponies. The visit was initially formal cultural differences and language barriers making communication careful. But the children broke the ice, fascinated by Hazel's chickens and the strange white woman who spoke broken Lakota with a German accent. By the end of the week-long visit, Winona and Hazel were trading recipes and child-rearing advice, while Lakota and his brother-in-law discussed horse breeding and hunting routes. When they departed, it was with promises to return in the fall and invitations for Hazel and Lakota to visit the northern camps. Your sister is formidable, Hazel said as they waved goodbye. Yes, you remind me of her. That is why I knew you would survive. Is that a compliment? The highest. Summer brought prosperity. Their garden flourished, the horses bred successfully, and Lakota hunting provided meat and hides to trade. They made occasional trips to Cinder Bluff, where they were greeted with respect and curiosity in equal measure. Deputy Greeley had hanged in December, and the town was slowly recovering from the corruption that had festered under his watch. Jonas Bell became a regular visitor, often bringing his daughter to play with the chickens. Ruth Carver stopped by monthly with books and news from the outside world. Eliza Morrow came twice, once to check on a horse's injured leg, once simply to share a meal and conversation. "You've built something good here," Eliza said during that second visit. "Something solid that's rare on the frontier." "We got lucky," Hazel said. "Luck had nothing to do with it. You chose each other. You chose to fight. You chose to build. That's not luck, that's will." One evening in late summer, as Hazel and Chatan Luda sat on their porch watching the sunset, she turned to him with news. "I am pregnant." He went still. "Are you certain?" "Yes. Dr. Morrow confirmed it yesterday." For a long moment he didn't speak, and Hazel felt fear creep in. They had never discussed children, never planned for them. What if he didn't want? But then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. When he finally released her, his eyes were bright with tears. "A child. Our child. You are happy. I am terrified and grateful, and so very happy. Even though—" She gestured between them, indicating their mixed heritage, the complications it would bring their child. "Especially because our child will be born of two peoples, two strengths. That is a gift, not a burden. We will teach them both ways, both languages. They will know where they come from and where they can go." Hazel felt tears on her own cheeks now. "I was afraid. After the stillbirth with Johann, I thought maybe I could not. But you can. You will. And I will be here. Every step." The baby came in early spring, a difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the next day. Eliza Morrow attended her capable hands, guiding the process, while Chatan Luda paced outside and Winona, who'd arrived a week early, to help sang traditional songs. When the baby finally arrived, a girl healthy and squalling, Chatan Luda was called inside. He knelt beside the bed, looking down at his daughter with an expression of awe. "She is perfect. She has your eyes," Hazel said, exhausted but smiling. "And your stubbornness, I expect." "Most likely." They named her Sarah, after Hazel's mother, with the Lakota name, Wiyaka, wasteland beautiful quill woman. She would be called by both names, claimed by both peoples, loved by both. Years passed. The homestead grew. They added a second room to the cabin, then a proper barn. Their horse herd increased. A second child came, a boy they named James Tatanka, Najin Standing Buffalo, who had his father's quiet strength and his mother's practical mind. Jonas Bell grew old and passed peacefully in his sleep. They mourned him and helped his daughter sell the homestead before moving east to live with family. Ruth Carver married a freight driver and moved to Cheyenne, but wrote regularly. Eliza Morrow trained a younger doctor to take over her practice and retired to a small house in Cinder Bluff, where she kept a garden and entertained visitors. The territory changed around them. The railroad came bringing more settlers. Cinder Bluff grew from a way station to an actual town with streets and a courthouse. The frontier pushed further west, and the Badlands that had nearly killed them became just another part of the landscape, tamed and mapped. But the valley remained, and the cabin, and the family that lived there. One evening, years after that first winter, Hazel and Chatan Luda sat on their porch, expanded now with proper rocking chairs, and watched their grandchildren play in the yard. Sarah's children visiting from the reservation, where she'd moved with her Lakota husband. James's children from the homestead he'd claimed 10 miles south with his wife, a banker's daughter from town, who loved the land as much as he did. "We did it," Hazel said softly. "Did what? Built something that lasted, something good." Chetan Luta took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that plagued his injured knee in cold weather. We did. Together. Always together. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains, the same mountains that had witnessed their vows all those years ago. The frontier had tested them, nearly broken them, but they'd survived. More than survived, they'd built a life raised, a family created, something lasting in a place that destroyed more than it created. The stars emerged, one by one, cold and distant as always. But on that porch in that valley, two people who'd saved each other in the Badlands sat close, their hands clasped, their hearts full, and the future they'd fought so hard to build, stretching ahead of them like an open road. And that was enough.